This happened back in 2015 during a hike I took in Arizona. The trail went through a short bit of desert, then up a medium-sized mountain that led to a canyon-like walkthrough at the top. Going for 8 to 10 hour hikes alone was my way of clearing my mind and getting away from the stress of everyday life. Anyways, the trail didn't seem to be well known, as there wasn't any parking nearby and the trailhead was really hard to find. It was hidden behind a line of thick bushes and the path was faint and faded. I never really specifically looked for low-traffic trails, but I didn't like running into people all the time on high-traffic trails either, so I was fine with the path being unknown. As I continued down, the trees began to look more and more dry, until most of them just seemed dead. Many had fallen over the trail, or had multiple thick branches falling off. The trail definitely hadn't been taken care of in the past few years. Making my way further down, the path began to lead through layers of thick, overgrown bushes. The path was distinct enough to know that I was still on the trail though, so I kept going. But that's when I heard a very distinct sound. A whistle, coming from up the mountain. It was faint, but I could hear the whistling hold a few notes before it stopped. I will admit, it was creepy and made me pretty uncomfortable, but I just figured someone else was on the trail. In the moment, that was the only thing that made sense. Another 20 minutes go by, and again I hear the same melodic whistle, but this time much closer and louder. I was a little more creeped out this time, but I wasn't about to leave the trail just because of some guy whistling nearby. I went up about a quarter mile further, keeping my pocket knife in my hand, just in case. A tree had fallen right on the path though, and the thorny branches made it difficult to climb over, so I had to walk around it. I turned to the right and took a couple steps before noticing a small valley, likely where a river used to flow. However, right in the middle was a small den made of large sticks. From the complexity of it, I knew it had to be man-made. I started putting the whistling and the den together, figuring someone might actually be living here. I got a bad feeling about the whole thing and decided I needed to go right away. But just as I turned to leave the valley, that same whistle came from right behind me. I felt my heart stop out of fear as I quickly turned to face the den. To my surprise, there was a goat standing just behind the valley exactly where I heard the whistle from. Its eyes felt like they were staring into me as it stood there motionless. I also couldn't help but notice how large it was compared to other ones that I'd seen around the area. I was really freaking out in my head at this point and couldn't even comprehend the whole situation. After a few seconds, I managed to control myself and began walking back slowly, still facing it. But as I took one step back, it opened its mouth slightly and unnaturally. Then it let out the same whistle I'd heard too many times already. My fear took hold and I sprinted down the mountain, falling multiple times over trees and rocks. I heard the whistle one more time, softly echoing down the mountain as I made it to the exit of the trail. I never told anyone about my encounter, as I thought nobody would ever believe me and I'd only sound like a coward. But I hadn't heard about skinwalkers until recently, and as soon as I dug deeper into them, I realized that that may be the only possible explanation to what I saw. I lived in a cabin out in Canada with my wife and 2 kids for almost 10 years. It was the life we all enjoyed, living out in the peaceful and quiet forest. The location of our cabin was very isolated, with no roads even leading to it. However, there were several other families that lived out in cabins a few miles around us. Over time, thin and faint paths formed between our cabins as we would often trade and join each other for dinner. We had a small farm for vegetables as well as a variety of livestock. Overall, our lives were good and quiet for years, but things took a very sudden turn. I was up late one night, sitting in our living room reading as I usually did, when I hear the cattle start moving around frantically outside. This was really unusual this late at night, so I went over to the window facing our backyard and moved the curtains aside. All of the cattle were on the far left side of the field, moving quickly as if they were running away from something. I shifted my gaze over to the right side, and I couldn't see much through the darkness, but after my eyes adjusted, I was able to make out a very large deer standing partially behind a tree, facing the house. It was very still, not moving at all, just looking in my direction. I couldn't tell if it was looking at me directly, but it gave me a very uneasy feeling. I didn't understand why the cattle would run from a deer, but seeing as it was nothing dangerous, I closed the curtain and went back to reading. A few more weeks go by as usual, before my wife wakes me up in the middle of the night. "What's going on?" He told me to be quiet and listen. I could see the fear in her eyes, as if she'd been up for a while now. Very quietly, I could hear something moving around the cabin, slowly. It sounded as if someone was dragging a stick along the walls all the way around. But after the sound made a full circle around the cabin, it stopped. I immediately got up and went to my kids' room to make sure they were okay, then grabbed my hunting rifle and went around to every window. I didn't see anything until the last window I checked, which was my bedroom window, where I could see the same deer standing in the dark forest staring in my direction, not moving at all. Again, I'd never seen an animal act like this before, and I had no explanation for the sounds around the cabin. A dark feeling fell over me, and I closed the curtain. I didn't know what was going on, but it was beginning to make me paranoid. I didn't believe in anything paranormal or possessive, but this was hard to wrap my head around. The next morning, I decided to take a long walk to one of my neighbors' cabins to ask if they had experienced anything unusual lately. I told my wife to keep the kids in the house and to make sure everything was locked, then headed down the path. The whole first mile, I was just trying to come up with any possible explanation for the events that had been happening, but the more I thought about it, the more scared I'd get. Halfway to my neighbor's cabin, I got a weird feeling, and almost instantly I heard leaves rustling behind me. I turned around and met the eyes of the deer, standing right on the path, just 15 to 20 feet from me. Staring into its eyes, chills ran down my entire body as I noticed white around its iris and small pupils, a distinct feature to that of human eyes. I turned back around and ran all the way to my neighbor's cabin, practically in tears as I had just witnessed something that I believed could not even be true. Thankfully, my neighbor was home and settled me down when I arrived. He seemed worried for me, but in a different kind of way than I was expecting. When I told him of what I'd seen, he didn't even seem surprised. Sitting in his cabin, he began to share with me his beliefs of the Navajo Skinwalkers. He said that they'd only show themselves if they wanted something from you, or if you have disturbed them. Him talking about it seemed to make him at peace though, which only terrified me even more. I left soon after, and luckily nothing happened on the way back. During the next few weeks, I could barely sleep and had horrible paranoia. But after a while of nothing else happening, I began to get better. However, the peaceful life that I once lived out in the cabin was taken from me, and I never fully recovered from the fear of what I saw. Eventually, we moved closer to town to give our children a better life. It's been almost 15 years since the events took place, and I never told my wife or kids what I saw on the path, or even what the neighbors told me. I'm not entirely sure why, but something inside of me just urges me to keep them out of it. I think that's why I felt the need to write this and share it now, because I've held it in for too long.